Fortitude, Fort Worth.
Welcome to Fortitude, folks. This is the artistic series. Today we're on location at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth, more affectionately known as the Modern. And our special guest today, who's going to give us a little tour of the Modern, is Chief Curator Andrea Karnes. Andrea, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
We're very excited to have you. I've known you for a little bit. You've done an amazing job, have some amazing exhibits over the years. Before we get going with the tour, please tell us a little bit about the museum's history, if you don't mind.
Sure. What a lot of people don't know is the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth is the oldest museum in Texas. Our charter was written in 1892, and we received a grant from the Carnegie at that time for $50,000, a little after that. So the earliest group of patrons were a group of ladies who met in the downtown library in Fort Worth to talk about art and the avant-garde. So as time went on, our mission changed. So now, since the 1970s, we have been focused on modern and contemporary.
Right.
Before that time, it was sort of art of the time, but the women who started the museum were looking to bring culture to Fort Worth. Sorry, I can keep going. I didn't know.
As you can hear, there's some school children in the background, which is good. We want the kids to come and see the general mission of the Modern. If you could tell us, like, what type of art are you after? What type of, we can go back into history as well, but the art here, it's always changing for those who don't know a lot, but we're trying to get people to understand the general gist of what the Modern is trying to do.
Sure. So I think since our beginnings, we have been trying to bring to Fort Worth things that we want our audience to see, and things that will also be sort of recognized in the art world at large. So since the 1970s, our scope has been international artists in all mediums, so in all media. So painting, sculpture, drawing, new media, photography, works on paper.
Right.
So the Kimball was built in 1972, so that's sort of the time when all the three museums got together and decided which museum in Fort Worth would sort of showcase what. And that's when we really began that mission of focusing on modern and contemporary. So what we basically want is for the museum to be alive with school tours and our local community, as well as the other thing that happens, which is people come from literally all over the globe to see this Tadao Ando building and our collection within.
I'm glad you mentioned Tadao Ando. Aside from the multiple pieces of incredible art here, thousands, if you will, but the building itself is a piece of art. Please tell us a little about the architecture and the designer.
Sure. So until 2002, the museum was always housed in a public building that we leased from the city. So we held a competition privately with our board and our chief curator and director, Marla Price, and chief curator at that time, Michael Opping, to narrow down to 5 architects, and then Tadao Ando was the one chosen. So Ando is known for his concrete and glass with steel armature, just like this building. And there are certain views within the building that you can see that tell you exactly what Ando is known for and what he's done.
Right.
He also looked to Louis Kahn, the architect of the Kimball Art Museum, as a mentor, as a distant mentor. And so there are lots of parts about this building that are subtle homages to the Kimball.
What do you love most about your job as chief curator? And also tell us a little about what that job entails, being a curator.
Sure. Okay, that's all big questions. First answer is the curator is the one who comes up with the ideas for exhibitions and then refines that idea, negotiates borrowing works from other institutions or private collectors to use for the exhibition.
Right.
And then hopefully tries to get a tour for the exhibition as well, and then writes the catalog for the exhibition. So really the curator is the advocate for whatever the exhibition is. It's analogous to being a lawyer in a way, but instead of arguing for your clients, you're arguing for the works of art and for the exhibition. So that is sort of like making sure that everything's within the right real estate, within the gallery space, and telling a kind of linear story with an exhibition. So what I love the most about it really is I love two things the most. I love working with living artists because it's more collaborative. And I love the fact that working with contemporary art often means you're not working against volumes and volumes of scholarship that have already been written. Right. So you can kind of jump off the high dive with some ideas and see if it sinks or swims, I guess, see if they sink or swim. But mainly I love collaborating with artists, which you cannot do if you are not working with living artists. So,
yes,
yeah.
ma'am. How many people would you say visit the Modern on a given year?
Kendall would know those numbers better than I do, but I think it's it's about 500,000, maybe a little less than that.
Very nice.
Yep.
Well, you've agreed to take us on a tour to see some of the works.
Yes.
The permanent collection. You'd also agree to take us to see the vault. Hopefully, we're excited to see that. Most people don't get to go to the vault, and then a little bit more of the works and things that are going on at the Modern. So grateful for your time, and let's go take a tour.
Let's go.
All right. All right, we're here. Andrea has graciously allowed us to come into the vault. So we're in the vault where most people don't get to go, and she's going to tell us about this Picasso behind us.
I wanted to bring you guys down here to see because this painting, La Femme Couchée Lisant, which means woman reclining reading, was the first work that this museum bought at auction in the 1960s, and it's a work by Picasso. This is his second wife, Jacqueline, reclining reading, and it's in the Grisaille palette, which of course is like from black to white, a phase that Picasso went through with this series of work. So this work was purchased for $105,000 on television before an international audience. And it really was the launching pad for this museum from, being a relatively regional museum to announcing itself on a grand scale.
Beautiful. How often will this piece come out for public display?
It's out quite often. It's not out right now, which is why I wanted to bring you down to the vault. But it's on view usually. If we hang the collection chronologically, it's usually like in the first gallery as you enter the lower galleries.
Beautiful.
And
thank you for showing us. It's extraordinary. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Andrea, we're here again in the vault with a beautiful Cindu Wy. Please tell us about this piece.
Okay, I will. While we were down here, I don't think we could resist looking at a few other things. I wanted to show you this just to make the point that there are certain artists in our collection, especially in the realm of contemporary, that we have decided to go very deep into their career. So with Cindu Wy, we did the first exhibition with him in 2006, and we purchased a painting out of that exhibition. And since then, we hosted a larger exhibition of his work, and now we have added this to our collection. This is a relatively new acquisition, along with 2 sculptures. What we noticed when we first showed Wy in 2006 was that it was bringing in a lot of young people and new audiences to the museum. And it was just so, I don't know, amazing to watch kids like pointing and looking at Wy's work and relating in a different way. So what Wy often does is take paintings from the past centuries, 18th, 19th century, and replace the often white male sitter with a young contemporary black man. So this work isn't referencing a specific painting, but it's the same idea with him of like having this very ornate wallpaper and then this traditional portrait of like almost nobility, but again, replacing the traditionally white male sitter with a young black man.
So Cindu, per your words, is bringing in the younger crowd to galleries, museums to see works, and strictly because of his technique.
His work naturally does that, and it's less about technique and more about content. You know, it's museums can be intimidating for people of all ages, but I think when you are able to walk into a museum and see someone you relate to. People love portraits because we can all, you know, it's the human face. We can all, that's an instant access for us as humans. So when you see something you can relate to in a museum, it peels back those layers of kind of, you know, intimidation.
Andrea, we're here with the Lorna Simpson, still in the vault. This piece, extraordinary. It's a large piece. What can you tell us about Lorna Simpson in this piece?
So Lorna Simpson is another one like Cindu Wy, where we started with a focus show, like we did with Cindu, and then it grew into us now having 3 works of Lorna's in the collection. In the 1990s, Lorna Simpson really rose to prominence as a Black female artist who was mostly engaged with photography to talk about herself as a Black woman and other people like her. So in this work, she's kind of moved to painting and printmaking. She's still using the idea of Black women, usually torn from the pages of Ebony or Jet magazine. But now they're sort of encased in these glaciers. These are her glacier paintings. And it's hard to see, but if you look, you can see strips of text and magazine images of women. So these women are sort of shaking loose from the glaciers. And this has to do with both feminism and racism and sort of a call to change things, a call for change and transformation.
All right, Andrea, we're here in front of one of my favorites, Mark Rothko, part of the permanent collection of the modern. What's going on here?
Well, so first I would like to say about this work that this was gifted to us from the estate of Anne Marion, who was our main patron over the last since the 80s, really. And before her, I mean, she really came on board in the 80s. Before her mother was, and before her grandmother was. Right. So Mrs. Marion left 5 works to us in her estate, and this Rothko is one of them. This is one of the most gorgeous and sumptuous Rothkos you could ever see in person, and we have it right here in Fort Worth. So in the 50s, Rothko was part of the abstract expressionists, but unlike some of his other fellow artists and colleagues, he was not really moving between figuration and abstraction. He was working with pure color, just like this pure colors and these floating rectangles of color. So in the 50s, he did a lot with a white center, and in different colors. And this one obviously is blue to black with white in the center. But the idea here, the edges are feathery, and if you stand right in front of the work, you can get completely lost in it. Right. It's so meditative and contemplative, and you're just reckoning with the shape and the color and the form. You know, there's no figure to pull out of it. There's you could look at it endlessly.
Fair.
And so that was very much what Rothko's work was about.
Fair to say this piece used to hang in Miss Marion's house?
Yes.
What a piece to have hanging above the fireplace, right?
Can you imagine living with this?
No, I surely can't.
Incredible.
We're here, Andrea, with one of my faves again, Jackson Pollock, a very common name for those who appreciate art out there. But this piece in particular belongs to the modern as well, part of the permanent collection. This is a fantastic piece.
Yes. So this work, like the Mark Rothko, came from the abstract expressionist movement. Jackson Pollock, also known as Jack the Dripper, had almost an exact opposite method to creating a work than Rothko. Whereas Rothko's works are about pure paint and form, Jackson Pollock, there's a great physicality about the work. And in this work, you can see a woman emerging, like a face and a body. Pollock used flings, drips from the paintbrush, but also sticks to stand over the canvas to create these forms. So you can feel that energy. And a thing about Pollock is that moving between abstraction and figuration. Right. So that you could see this as an entirely abstract work until maybe the figure starts to come out. But the question is also, is the figure receding or coming out of the background? So that's another kind of radical idea when Pollock first did it, this notion of the space of a canvas.
Because it's not like his typical work of the huge drip paintings in Jack the Dripper, as you call him. Yeah. This is a little bit different.
It's different than one that is complete layers of abstraction with drips, yes. But it's in that same vein, basically.
There you have it, Jack the Dripper. Andrea, we're here in a little bit more of the open area, showing off some of the architecture, but this is a Mutu, one of my favorites. I say that every time. I feel like everything's my favorite here, but this piece particular has its own little showroom with the architecture and the pond outside.
Yes.
What's happening with the Mutu?
Okay, so this is the Kenyan-American artist Wangechi Mutu. And in 2019, Mutu was asked by the Metropolitan Museum of Art to create sculpture to occupy their 4 niches that face Fifth Avenue. And the niches were designed in 1905, but had never been occupied by sculpture, which is what they were meant to do. So Mutu was the very first one ever. What an honor to be outside of the Met. So she created 4 sculptures. This is one of them. So these are caryatids, which in architecture means they're women who are like a column, like columnal, who carry the load for architecture. So in the ancient world, a caryatid had different meanings in Africa than it did in Mayan culture, for example. But these carried on into Greco-Roman architecture and classical architecture, but it really started before that. But these caryatids are not carrying the load necessarily. They're more like goddesses. They're in between humans and goddesses. And you can see the cranial binding has happened here, and all this ornamentation, which is a sign of stature in African culture. Also, these great coils to elongate the neck that go on into her garment. You can tell these sinewy spirals become really heavy, almost like an armature. So they're protecting her. And if you look at her fingers, they're much longer than human fingers. And you look at her eyes, the whole thing, when you take her in, she is a goddess. So we thought it would be so wonderful to have her like presiding over this beautiful pond and this beautiful Ondo building. She looks fantastic isolated like she is here, but also I definitely have plans to move her into the galleries and put her in conversation with other works in the collection.
You better get some help for that one.
Yeah,
What's the median here for Mutu?
So bronze, and the thing that happened was, so she made the 4 to go in the niches outside of the Met in 2019, but then COVID happened. So these are small editions, and we acquired this one before it was made, before the foundry could make it, because then everything shut down, And Mutu was going to come here and help me cite it, but we ended up having to do it all via Zoom because of the pandemic. So my hope is to get her here someday soon to talk about her work and to see it in person. Yeah, I think she'd be
Thank you for sharing the Mutu, yes.
Sure.
We're here with Jennie Holzer's piece, a mainstay here at the Modern. You've seen it. If you've been to the Modern, you've probably seen this piece, and always some interesting things coming down as script. Jennie's got a lot to say for sure. How did this piece come to be, and what's going on with this piece?
Okay, so this piece is a retrospective of Jennie Holzer's truisms, which are actually sort of slogans, but that she made up. They say things like money creates taste, things that make you go, is that? So they've been in public areas before, so they do look like a public service announcement. But in this case, it's a retrospective of many of her truisms in Spanish and English, and they run toward the pond and then away from the pond, and sometimes also, so vertically, and then sometimes also horizontally across. And the work was purchased to commemorate our 10-year anniversary in this building.
Okay.
So there are certain works within the collection that we hardly ever move, that sort of anchor the collection. This is one of them. So this work has been here for 10 years now, and people love it, and there would be an outcry if it were to go away. We may take it away at some point, I don't know, for a while. But at night, there's a big crescendo at 10 p.m., and this whole gallery pavilion lights up in blue. So if we're having a party or an event here, it's kind of this nice moment.
Surely. Yeah. Is Jennie very prolific in the world as far as her projects?
100%.
Okay.
She is working still all the time. And she was here with us with her team for 6 weeks. That's how long it took to program the LEDs and the language here. So yes, she's got lots of projects still. She's a feminist. She's very political. She always has been. That's what her work is about. So she continues all of that.
Good for her. It seems to translate well. All right, Andrea, if you've been alive for the last 100 years or less, you probably could recognize this artist. He's one of the big ones.
Yes.
This belongs to you guys, and it's significant. Tell us about this Andy Warhol.
It is significant. It might be the work most requested from us for loans and for reproduction. So Warhol in 1962 closed an exhibition of his soup cans, which you probably all know, in Los Angeles. And right after that exhibition closed, Marilyn Monroe, the iconic actress, overdosed and passed away. So as soon as that happened, Warhol, who knew her, began to create a series of her face, basically. And he picked, even though she died in 62, he picked a press image of her from the 1950s. It's what stood out to him. So you see this gray kind of border, and then the works are silk screened. Marilyn's face is silk screened on repetitively. So you can see like there are darker parts, and this is from the silk screen getting dirty and the ink smudging, but he leaves it like this on purpose. So this idea of repetition has to do with a critique of consumerism or of like mass media. A critique and a working with, like moving things like mass production into the realm of high art, which is what the pop artist did. And remember, they're coming after Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko, who we just talked about. So they're moving, you know, not in reaction against, but they're trying to stretch the boundaries again. So they're moving away from abstraction into figuration. And their way of sort of bucking the system is to use mass-produced imagery or things from commercial culture or mass culture as subject matter in art.
Very nice. This request to loan, is there a list somewhere I can put my name on it? Because yes, this would be a lovely piece to borrow, wouldn't it?
Okay, this one, you know, when it does go on loan, it's fragile. And all the other things that make it, you know, we feel a responsibility to let works be seen in other places. But this one, it has to be like an Andy Warhol retrospective or something really major for this work to go out on loan.
How often are you loaning permanent collection pieces out?
We regularly, like every year. We have another Mark Rothko that's out on loan right now. It's in Paris. We always have works. We always have works being requested. And we go through a process of looking at a work's condition, talking with our executive committee to grant the loan or not, looking at a work's value. Usually if a work of ours travels, one of our team goes with it until it's on the wall and safely somewhere, and then we go back to pick it up. So, you know, it's a lot, but we also know that these works can be in conversation with varieties of our own collection, but they should also be in conversation with other works of art globally.
Andrea, another very popular artist throughout the last couple of decades, Roy Lichtenstein. This piece belongs to you as well. How did you acquire this, and what seems to be going on here?
So the museum, well, first let me say that Lichtenstein, like Warhol, is like one of the fathers of pop art. And so this work and the Warhol Marilyns are two of the most popular within the collection. And we like to have them out as often as possible. The work shows a comic strip. Again, like this is a way of bucking the system for the pop artists, like taking again an image that's mass produced. We're not seeing the entire comic, but it's like a still from a comic strip. But, and you see the bin-day dots, which is, those dots are how newspaper, you know, the process of printing for a newspaper. So he leaves the dots in, we see this military man. And then there's a thought bubble that says, I'm supposed to report to Mr. Bellamy. I wonder what he's like. And the title of the painting is Mr. Bellamy. So this is how Lichtenstein takes away from the image that he appropriated from a comic strip. Richard Bellamy was a gallery owner in New York of the Green Gallery.
Okay.
So, Lichtenstein is putting his own content into the work. And it's a private joke, between he and his new dealer.
I understand. What was Roy's, what made him especially unique? He's obviously, was he the first to do this type of art? Is that why he's special?
Not the first, but I would say unique to him are the Ben-Day dots. And in this case, it's hard for us to see this today, but if you put on period eyes and look at this work, when pop art was really coming into focus in the 1960s, the idea of using a thick black outline was a no-no in painting before this. The idea of using primary colors, which he does in this work, another no-no. So again, these artists are completely stretching the boundaries of what came before them and where the direction they want to take art. So critiquing consumer culture, but also working within it, but then also elevating to a fine art by things like personal content, not mass-produced, just a mass-produced image, but actually painted. So all these things were being done by all the pop artists, but yes, Lichtenstein at the forefront.
Andrea, this is not a ladder to the attic. I know this is a Martin Purrier piece that's been around here a while. It's a fantastic piece by a fantastic artist.
Yes.
What can you tell us?
Well, first I would say, we talked about the Mark Rothko from Anne Marion's estate.
Yes.
Mrs. Marion and others on our executive committee were instrumental in purchases such as the Martin Purrier. And just, you don't get patrons like Anne Marion very often anywhere in the world. So we borrowed this Martin Purrier for the opening of our museum, but we didn't own it. Okay. But when she saw it and then talked to the rest of our executive committee, they were like, this cannot leave. This has to be part of the collection. And they made it happen, which is so incredible. But anyway, Martin Purrier, this was from a tree, one tree on his property in upstate New York. So he felled the tree, and then the interior, this is a maple tree, and I forget the type of tree this is, but I'll think of it. But anyway, Purrier felled the tree. He created this work. It's called Ladder for Booker T. Washington.
Okay.
If you see the top of the ladder, you can see that there's an impossibility about actually climbing it because it gets narrower and narrower. So for human scale, by the time you got, to the midpoint, it would be too small for hands and feet.
Right.
But the idea was that Booker T. Washington was criticized and hailed during his own lifetime as someone who encouraged Black Americans to, to enter school and, civil rights activists, an activist for civil rights.
Right.
And I think the main thing is that Booker T. Washington was criticized because he was criticized by Black intellectuals for not necessarily preaching about higher education, but preaching about trade school and that kind of thing. So there's this impossibility that has to do somewhat with that, but it's also praising Booker T. Washington for all that he did for Martin Purrier's a Black artist, for Black art, Black people in the U.S.
Sure. You mentioned Anne Marion a few times, Andrea. Do you know how she found this piece? How did this become in her purview? Is there a story behind that, or do we know?
We borrowed it for our opening here, and that's when she saw it.
She saw it first.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for sharing that story.
Sure.
So, all right, Andrea, we are here in front of a kind of a new acquisition for the modern Stanley Whitney.
Yes. So this work is called Good Trouble, and it's titled after the Congressman John Lewis, who gave the commencement speech at Emory College and talked about good trouble. Again, John Lewis, an activist, civil rights activist. Stanley Whitney dedicated this work to him because it was painted the year that John Lewis died. So the work, Stanley Whitney, this work is very characteristic of what he has done throughout his career, which is paint abstract forms, pay very close attention to color, and have everything gridded in these sort of runners here. So you see the green goes all the way across, and then the blue goes all the way across, and up here it's sort of this teal and aqua color, and then these squares in between. So much like, you know, other artists who were rising to prominence around the same time that he was maturing as an artist, the minimalists, Whitney is sort of doing that, using that same grid and the idea of repetitive forms, but there's so much humanness in his work versus like, say, a Donald Judd, where it could almost be like made by a machine, and in fact parts of Donald Judd sculptures are. With Stanley, you can always see the hand, you can see these brush strokes, the bright colors, the idea of how to put colors together. And it also becomes this meditative thing for the artist, like a meditation on the grid.
Right. Andrea, we are not in the playground, but this is definitely a favorite of the kids, and a lot of people's favorite new pop artist, Caus.
Yeah.
This is an incredible piece.
I would say kids of all ages, for sure. So Caus is another artist like Cindu Wy, who started with a focus exhibition here. I did a show, a small show of Caus's work, and again, we just sort of realized that, like, wow, we're getting this whole new audience of a younger crowd who really want to see Caus's work. So then I did a 20-year survey of his work, and that brought people from around the world, and seriously, like a line around the building the night before the show opened. So we have always wanted a sculpture back here to sort of activate the space. And we wanted to do it on a really grand scale because we're by the pond, so a lot of people see this work from the other side of the pond, or they come out here like we are right now. You can see it up close as well. But this work is called Clean Slate. It shows one of Caus's three main figures, the companion figure, loosely relates to Mickey Mouse. And then you see companion is holding two smaller companions. And I'm not going to say this is autobiographical, but Caus, at the time that he made this, did have two toddlers. So you can, you know, his work comes out of pop art in the sense that it's taking from sort of mass culture, you know, the idea of Mickey Mouse, but there's a kind of humanness, especially because in this case, you know, carrying two toddlers, sort of the weary parent carrying two toddlers. So the work, because of its humanness, always feels really accessible to anyone who sees it. So Caus's work just resonates with viewers young and old.
Surely. I've heard this question asked before. Is Caus making a dig at Disney and you know, cartoon characters in some sense, or no?
Not really. He worked as an animator young in his career, like very young in his career. I mean, he actually started his career as a graffiti artist.
Right.
But I think he is going with the idea that there are so many pre-existing images. Why not give yourself the challenge of sort of taking something pre-existing, like Mickey Mouse, for example, making it your own, making it recognizable. I don't think he would say this, but as a Caus work rather than as Mickey Mouse, you know? So it's just like challenging yourself to use something that's already in the world.
Right. I haven't asked you this yet, but you've met many of the artists whose works you adorn your gallery, your halls. You met Caus, I believe. What is Caus like?
Well, I didn't just meet him. I worked with him for a long time because we put together his 20-year, you know, survey of his work. He's a lovely human. I mean, he's so generous as a person, just very giving when it comes to like accessibility, but also he's been generous to us as a museum. And you know, part of what he does, he makes toys, he collaborates with everyone from Uniqlo to like very high-end fashion, and then he makes, of course, works that belong in museums. So part of that is sort of wanting to be able to produce things for all ends of the market so that a young kid who maybe doesn't even have a job yet can have a t-shirt or a toy that is Caus's work versus what an institution could do.
Sure. And his show here a few years ago now, successful by any stretch, right?
Yes. Yes. One of the most successful. And I loved working with him, and I would love to do it again someday. But we just need to put a little distance. It's actually been a decade since that exhibition.
Incredible. So. I got to believe you have some really neat friends in your purview, in your cell phone. That's what a great guy to have in your.
I'm lucky. Yes. I'm lucky.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
Andrea, we're coming to the tail end of our tour in front of this Ellsworth Kelly. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, personal questions. I know you've been around here a while. When did you arrive at the Modern?
Well, I arrived at the Modern in 1989.
You don't look a day over 1990.
I went to undergrad school at UNT. I had a degree in art history, and the Modern Art Museum was hiring a receptionist. Okay. So that was my first job here.
Incredible.
And then I was a researcher, and then I was the registrar, which is the person who, like at a university, registrars keep records on the students. In a museum, they keep records on each object.
Right.
So I did that job, and while I was doing that job, I went to graduate school at TCU. I went to our chief curator to say, I want to go to grad school. I really want to be a curator. Would you write me letters of recommendation? And he said, well, don't tell anyone, but I think there'll be opportunity for you here because we're about to announce that we're building a new building. So I ended up, staying here. And then I was assistant curator, then associate curator, then senior curator, now chief curator. It's crazy, but I've loved every minute of it. And I am so privileged to work with our collection and all the special exhibitions that we do.
Well, we appreciate the time. The tour was magnificent. It's easy to see you love what you do, and Fort Worth is grateful for people like you in the art community. Thank you to the Modern. We're grateful for the time. Thank you for watching Fortitude. This has been our artistic series, and this has been Chief Curator of the Modern, Andrea Karnes.
Thank you, JW.
Yes, ma'am.
Fortitude, Fort Worth.